Welcome back everyone to Real Horror. I'm Tensa, and today I want to switch things up for the next few weeks and have more of a free-form discussion. The first topic I'd like to tackle is based on a question that divides many horror fans and sometimes the general movie-going audience. What is the scariest movie ever made? My curiosity was sparked by this debate a few months ago when IMDb's Twitter page posed the following question. Agree or disagree, The Exorcist is the scariest horror movie? I somewhat agreed with this as a response. It is the film that is consistently referred to as the scariest and usually tops many lists for people. However, I only somewhat agreed because while I do find it to be absolutely terrifying, incredibly well made, and a groundbreaking film in the genre, I can't completely admit that it truly scares me. When it was released in 1973, it shook audiences because they had never been exposed to anything like that. The reactions it received during the time period in which it was released is probably why it became notorious as the scariest movie ever. When I read the responses to IMDb's tweet, I was surprised to see there was a split between those who agreed and disagreed. There were those who called it a true classic and it scared them half to death. Then there was the other camp that disagreed, thought it didn't hold up, and provided a movie they found scarier. I wondered if these people were just jaded by the content being produced today and found no horror in this 47-year-old movie? Or as a diehard fan of the subgenre, do I stick with the status quo and just agree that it deserves to be called the scariest? Is it just a well-made horror film, or is it genuinely the scariest too? Well, in October, a group called Broadband Choices conducted a study. It was called the Science of Scare Project, in which they collected the heart rates of 50 people of various ages who watched 100 hours of scary movies. After the test was completed, Broadband created a scientific list of scariest movies ever. They determined that the award of scariest went to 2012's Sinister. The Exorcist? It came in 17th out of the top 35. First off, the group collected 50 movies for the subjects to watch based on critic and Reddit recommendations. Then the subjects watched the movies in 5.1 surround sound and were fitted with heart rate monitors to determine which movie got their blood racing. Their resting heart rate was recorded along with their beats per minute during the movie and highest spike, or the biggest jump scare. The top 5 scientifically scariest were Sinister, Insidious, The Conjuring, Hereditary, and Paranormal Activity. Do I agree with this study?
No, I don't at all. No.
It was an interesting way to go about it, and they covered their bases fairly well in terms of who they studied and how they managed the experiment. However, I personally don't agree with the results 100%. There are some good movies on the list, but it's a little annoying that the top 5 only consists of films that were made within the last 10 years. I do think Sinister is a pretty good scary movie. I was a big fan of it when it came out because I thought Ethan Hawke was great as the main character, and I was really disturbed by the home movies. But I do not think it's the scariest movie ever. It relies a little too heavily on jump scares, even though I think it has an effective one in Yard Work. I've always been under the belief that jump scares are cheap, but they can be done correctly if the timing is right and they're not repeated ad nauseum. So if we're gonna compare The Exorcist and Sinister, I'm gonna go with The Exorcist. Between IMDb's proposed question and the study, you can already see people vary a lot on what they deem to be the scariest movie. But it shows that fear, just like comedy, is subjective. You decide what's scary or not. There are those that find the paranormal scarier than the psychological. Monsters like zombies, vampires, etc. frighten some more than slashers like Jason, Michael, and Freddy. Take me for example. I'm not terribly afraid of ghosts, so a movie like Poltergeist, while a very good movie, does not scare me one bit. It's the stuff that I believe can really happen, i.e. the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, and The Strangers, that genuinely freaks me out. The things actual human beings are capable of disturb me way more than the possibility that a ghost may haunt my house or a vampire is gonna suck my blood. To give you all a better look at myself, I deal with anxiety.
That means I'm in my shell and have a hard time expressing myself. I find it difficult to engage with others.
I have trouble dealing with social situations, overthinking, helplessness, all that good stuff. With that, I sometimes dive into paranoia, where I think a lot of people, especially those that I'm close to, secretly dislike me and find me annoying. Once I fall down that rabbit hole, my brain tells me that people are potentially scheming against me and that everyone knows but you feeling messes with your head. The reason I'm talking about all this is because I can admit these are genuine fears that I deal with on a daily basis. So, when a movie can prey upon those feelings, I find them to be the most frightening. With that said, in my opinion, I find Hereditary to be my scariest movie. In order to discuss why, I'm gonna have to spoil a little bit of the movie, so if you haven't seen it, please skip to this time code to avoid having it ruined. Or pause this, watch it, then come back and continue. So by the end of Hereditary, you find out that Annie Graham and her family have been manipulated by a cult that worships the demon Payman. Annie's mother, Ellen, was the leader of the cult, unbeknownst to Annie. But after her passing, the group went into overdrive in order to revive Payman into a human host, going after Annie's children, Peter and Charlie. The whole movie deals with Annie, played brilliantly by Toni Collette, dealing with the tragedies she suffered her entire life, including the loss of her brother and father, who died due to their mental illnesses. She starts to believe that she suffers from her own mental issues and is terrified it will be passed down to her children. Things unravel after the absolutely disturbing death of daughter Charlie, leading Annie to eventually discover that this cult of Payman is controlling the outcome of her and her family's lives. I suggest you watch the movie yourself to get the full effect, as my paraphrasing isn't the best, but my point in why it's my personal scariest movie is because of how powerless it makes you feel. Something bigger than Annie is working against her. Her fate and the fate of her family has tragically been determined by this manipulating force, and they lack the ability to stop it. From the moment all of them were born, they were doomed, and that chills me to my core. Being powerless to stand up to what's against you, to feel like you're crazy even when you think you may be in the right, unaware that everyone is against you and plotting your life, is messed up. It hits me harder than any horror movie has, and that's why I would label it as the scariest. But even after that entire explanation, I can bet there are those that have seen Hereditary and completely disagree with everything I just said and don't find it scary in any way, shape, or form. And that's totally fine. Again, fear is ultimately subjective. It's because of this that I love having the discussion of scariest movie ever with other people. It's interesting to know what has an effect on people and what doesn't. What keeps you up at night may bore someone else to sleep. Is the popular answer, The Exorcist, the definitive answer to the titular question? In terms of the horror genre overall, I think I'd be willing to admit that this is one of the most significant, well-made, and scariest movies ever. However, the scariest movie to me that feeds off my own fears is without question Hereditary. With all that said, let's hear from you. What do you consider to be the scariest movie ever made? Are you in the Exorcist camp? Did you test with that group that said it was sinister? Leave me your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and follow my Twitter and Instagram. Links to those are in the description. Next week, I'm going to tone things down and talk about some of my favorite comfort horror movies. Until next time, peace.